Shabbat Shalom. Before I call up our esteemed speaker for the morning, I did want to take a moment and frame today's focus on reproductive justice and the work of our SAJ reproductive justice initiatives in the context of today's Parsha, which, as you know, is the first Torah portion in Leviticus, Vayikra. Leviticus is widely considered one of the most challenging books of the Torah for a modern audience. It focuses quite a bit on instructions, as we saw today, almost excruciatingly detailed instructions about ritual, purity, and sacrifice. So I want to offer two ideas about Vayikra that I hope will help the Parsha resonate more fully with us today and put us in the mindset to connect this Torah to the information that Liz will share with us. The first is the extent to which Vayikra and Leviticus more broadly call us to consider the foundation of our own moral decision-making and the extent to which Torah values inform or should inform them. In the words of Rabbi Harold Schulweis, what commandments do I truly accept? What commandments do I expect from myself? What is the hierarchy of my own values that do not come from a command from outside, but from an internal imperative? And I find this reflection particularly important at a moment in which forces are using religious commandments to restrict the reproductive autonomy, bodily autonomy, dignity, and safety of millions of individuals in our country. As a Jew, I feel it is my responsibility to argue not only that Jewish law has a different stance on abortion and reproductive justice specifically, but that a Jewish perspective requires a different orientation toward the role of government. As Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan wrote in his Basic Values in Jewish Tradition, published in 1947, the choice with which modern society is confronted is between two ways of life. The one, that of democracy, which is based on belief in the divinity of righteousness and justice, which the Torah identifies as the way of the Lord. The other, that of totalitarianism, based on the aggressive will to power, with domination as a supreme expression of the meaning of life. Which of these assumptions is correct cannot be proved by argument. One can make out a good theoretical case for one as the other. Our preference, both as Jews and as Americans, is clearly for the democratic way of life. We want to believe in it. We need to believe in it. We are therefore grateful for the example of people whose faith persisted through ordeals that again and again challenged its validity. 1947, 2024, okay. As our journey into Leviticus asks us to grapple with our own hierarchy of values and acceptance of internal and external commandments, so too does it ask us to defend our society from the misuse of religion in service of domination over others as an acceptable expression of the meaning of life. Which brings me to the second connection that I'd like to make with the Parsha. The Torah portion is called Vayikra, and indeed the book of Leviticus is called Vayikra in Hebrew because the first word of the Parsha and the book is Vayikra, which means and he called or and was called. The first sentence of the Parsha and the book of Leviticus reads, and God called to Moses and spoke to him. So why can't the Torah just say, and God spoke to Moses? Why does God have to call him first? The rabbis have a lot to say about this, but one answer that I really like is that in order to receive or grapple with commandments or our own values, we need to call ourselves to presence. The same root, kriyah, is used for kriyat HaTorah, the public reading of the Torah, and kriyat Shema, the reading of the Shema. In order to hear the most important values in our lives, we must first call ourselves and each other to presence. You may also notice, if you looked back to the beginning of the Parsha, and I encourage you to do it if you hadn't before, in the first word, Vayikra, the Aleph, that last Hebrew letter of the word, is written smaller than the other letters. And there are a bunch of instances in the Torah where words are like written differently, and the commentators love to talk about these. One common interpretation about why this Aleph is small is that Moses wanted to write the word Vayikar, which uses the same first letters without that final Aleph, which means he happened, meaning that God happened upon him accidentally rather than calling him. But God told him to write the Aleph, and so he wrote it small. To me, this is such a true and human existential question. Do we really want to be called? Are we ready to be called to reflect on righteousness? But the other interpretation of this that I love has to do with the role of the Aleph more broadly in the commandments. Aleph is the first word in Ani, the Hebrew word for I, and the first letter in the word Anochi, which is the first word of the 10 Commandments. I am the Lord your God, Anochi Adonai Elohecha. Martin Buber uses this Aleph as the basis of the I-thou encounter between humans and God. In a time when it can be hard to feel our own actions and voice matter, how can we use the Aleph of Vayikra to restore the ethical imperative of our own agency in the fight for reproductive justice and justice more broadly? It's my honor to introduce Liz Zimmerman, community organizer for the National Council on Jewish Women, New York Jews for Repro campaign. As we listen to her words, may we feel called to presence and reflection worthy of Vayikra and this moment.
Hi, is this, I'm short too. How's that? Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
It's really
How's
low.
this? Better? How's that? Better?
Is that too high or is that good?
Hello?
Just have to get it closer to your mouth.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'm so happy to be here with all of you this morning. And thank you for the kind introduction, Sarit, and for your wisdom about this week's Torah portion. Is this good? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Connecting it to the need for Jews to speak up at this moment when other religions have co-opted the narrative around faith, religion, reproductive rights, and equality. I'm proud to represent the National Council of Jewish Women, New York, where I serve as the community organizer for the Jews for Repro New York campaign. At NCJW, we turn progressive Jewish ideals into action. We provide direct services to support our neighbors in need, and we have a history of spearheading progressive change by responding to the needs of the moment in our community. For many decades, NCJW has been the leading Jewish organization fighting to protect and expand reproductive rights and abortion access. And while I don't think we ever expected to be finished with this work, I don't think anyone expected to be where we are right now in 2024. It's still very hard for me to believe that my 23-year-old daughter has fewer rights now than I did at her age, but here we are. So the question is, what can we, as pro-choice Jewish New Yorkers, do right now? First of all, we can stand up as Jews and say abortion bans are against my religion. Religion is essentially how we lost federal protection for abortion, and religion may be the strongest way to get it back. The religious freedom argument by Jews and others may be our best chance to break this cycle of one narrow religious view dictating more and more of our nation's law and policies. Everyone knows that Jews support abortion access, but they need to know that we support it not in spite of our religion, but because of it. We are really at a crisis moment right now when the forces using their beliefs, in this case, evangelical Christian beliefs, are restricting reproductive rights, civil rights, autonomy, and dignity for millions. We've seen an increase in the shockingly open use of Christian language as the basis for decisions regulating women's healthcare and bodily autonomy in recent years. The frightening implication is that it's not only acceptable to reference these beliefs, which represent a small minority of society, but that they should be the accepted justification for these decisions, which under the First Amendment should in no way respect or hold one religious belief as absolute or above any others. The outrageous recent Alabama IVF ruling has ignited a heated debate surrounding reproductive freedom and the use of religion as a justification for government interference. This, I mean, you can't even call it controversial. I mean, this crazy decision, which references God 41 times and repeatedly quotes from the Bible, undermines the autonomy of couples struggling with infertility and stands in direct opposition to Jewish belief in Jews' reproductive religious freedoms. And in fact, it actually impacts Jews more than any other group, as Jews in the United States disproportionately rely on IVF, with 17% of Jewish women utilizing fertility treatments to get pregnant, as compared to 12.5% of the general population. So this ruling will cause tremendous pain as it strips away access to crucial scientific advances for Jews, LGBTQ couples, and so many more who rely on IVF to start a family. The language in the decision is an open embrace of Christian nationalism, or the idea that the US should be an explicitly Christian country and its laws should reflect that. It was framed as if the state of Alabama is a theocracy and that that's a legitimate way of evaluating laws and policies. Moreover, the ruling demonstrates reason for broader concern about the government's intrusion into to personal and private matters. We're seeing attempts to eliminate birth control, emergency contraception, and sex education in schools based on the same religious justifications. It's never been more important to fight for protecting reproductive freedom and ensuring that individuals have the right to make decisions about their own bodies and families without undue interference from the government and from those religions that seek to impose their beliefs on others. In New York, we do have opportunities to ensure that we remain a place that protects and expands reproductive rights and abortion access. And, many people feel that reproductive rights are safe here in New York, but still there are many barriers to access that currently exist. And what happens on the national landscape does and will affect us here. In fact, this Tuesday, NCJW is hosting a Facebook Live event during oral arguments at the Supreme Court for the FDA versus Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, which is the case that could impact the availability of the abortion and miscarriage drug mifepristone throughout the country, including here in New York. If you're interested in joining that, you can find information on our Facebook page how to come into the live event. Also, the New York State Equal Rights Amendment will be on the ballot for all New Yorkers to vote on in this November 2024. This amendment will enshrine abortion protections into the New York State Constitution, as well as extend to all New Yorkers the right to be free from discrimination, particularly groups who have faced pervasive injustice in the past. The ERA would specifically prohibit discrimination by the government based on a person's ethnicity, national origin, age, disability, and sex, including sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, as well as pregnancy, pregnancy outcomes, reproductive health care, and autonomy. And with regard to reproductive rights, the ERA prohibits restrictions on access to abortion because the ability to control one's reproduction is seen as a necessary condition for and instrumental to really for women's full citizenship and participation in public life and equality. Currently, New York's state constitution only explicitly protects against racial and religious discrimination. And advocates have realized that with the overturning of Roe and essentially half a century's protection of women's right to bodily autonomy, individual states have to act to protect and expand these rights, and the strongest way is through amending state constitutions. We saw the most recent win last November when Ohio voters passed a measure to enshrine abortion rights into their constitution. And in 2022, there were actually 6 ballot measures addressing abortion, and the side favoring access won in every case. This year, in addition to New York, both Florida and Maryland will also have similar ballot measures, and organizers are actually working in as many as 13 other states to try to get a similar measure on their ballots. New York State constitutional amendments must pass in 2 successive legislative terms and then be voted on by the majority of voters in a ballot referendum. And we know that, New York passed a law decriminalizing abortion in 1970, which was before Roe and was very progressive and celebrated at its time. However, for various reasons, it became outdated and was problematic in that the law was in the penal code, not the health code. And it took until 2019 for the Reproductive Health Act to pass after over a decade of trying. But that can be overturned with just one anti-abortion leaning state legislature. And we know in 2022, a staunchly anti-abortion politician came within 6 percentage points of winning the election for New York State governor. Also in the legislature, pro-choice leaders have actually only controlled both chambers for 8 of the past 58 years. So the ERA, once enshrined into the state constitution, would really insulate us from shifting political winds. NCJW New York is a member of a broad statewide coalition of organizations advocating for passage of the ERA called New Yorkers for Equal Rights. And we're helping to coordinate advocacy efforts such as postcarding, phone banking, and canvassing. And I believe there's a handout you can take and you can follow them. But our and your participation is actually especially important as the passage of the ERA comes down to a simple majority vote. 50% of the vote plus 1 is all that's needed to pass it. We know that in 2020, 8 million New Yorkers voted. We also know where the voters are located that are likely to vote for passage of the ERA. And they're right here, actually. They're downstate in the Hudson Valley, Westchester, Long Island, and especially New York City. New York City voters account for 37% of the electorate identified as needed to vote yes on this measure. Therefore, your participation is extremely important. We know that 30% of New York City voters who turned out to vote in 2021 didn't vote for the ballot measures. And that was a stark decrease from 2017 when there was only a 12% drop off. So we need people to educate others about the ballot measure, remind them to vote, and make sure they know to flip that ballot over. We know there'll be opposition, there'll be a heavy misinformation campaign by those who oppose it. Ballot measures always need a lot of education around what they actually do. People can be confused, they don't understand the language and what it means. So again, if you want to take the one pager, follow us on social media and talk about it to people you know. Because of the length of the process involved, if this ballot measure doesn't pass in this election, it could be years before we see it on the ballot again. An additional goal I wanted to mention of the Jews for Repro New York campaign is to help educate communities about and fight crisis pregnancy centers. And we do that through our Pro-Truth New York initiative. Some of you may have heard of crisis pregnancy centers or CPCs. They're sometimes called pregnancy resource centers or limited service pregnancy centers, but in reality, they're fake clinics, and they're really the front lines of the anti-abortion movement. Their one and only goal is to keep people from getting abortions. These fake clinics work to look and sound like real reproductive health clinics, but they're actually run by anti-abortion activists, and they're dangerous because they provide patients with false information about abortion, give inaccurate results from ultrasounds, specifically target low-income women and women of color, and they ultimately put people's health and safety at risk. They generally use similar tactics, such as confusing signage with neutral names, including like choice, options, pregnancy. They set up near real clinics to confuse people. Planned Parenthood's health center in Brooklyn actually has a CPC in the same building. They use SEO to manipulate people's online search results. So instead of being directed to a legitimate reproductive care clinic, they'll be directed to CPC websites. And there's actually a company called the Human Coalition, which specializes in the use of SEO and digital marketing techniques for anti-abortion groups. It's crazy. Once they lure people in, they'll lie about the effects of abortion. They cite fake medical research saying abortion causes cancer, infertility, mental illness. They'll invoke religion and just generally overwhelm people with propaganda. They try anything to delay patients. They have volunteers with no medical training who put on a white lab coat and do an ultrasound with a machine they ordered off the internet. They'll underestimate how far along people are and overstate natural miscarriage rates, basically to get people to delay scheduling the procedure and thereby miss the window when it's still available. They can follow up with calls and harassment. They'll collect your personal information, and because they're not a licensed medical facility, they can call a partner or call a parent. They can also share private health information with national anti-abortion networks, which really is concerning in the states that have criminalized abortion post-Dobbs. And again, they target low-income people, women of color, immigrants, and those who speak a second language, students and young people, and all groups who are already at a disproportionate risk of adverse health outcomes. How do they get away with this? Since they're not licensed medical facilities, they're exempt from certain government regulations, such as staffing requirements, as well as state and federal rules governing patient privacy and medical ethics. So essentially, they're operating under the radar and lying without consequences. Fake clinics are considered religious outreach, and therefore they're protected by the First Amendment. While they have the right to speak about abortion, the government really has an interest in preventing both medical fraud and deliberately delaying pregnant women from seeking legitimate medical care from licensed professionals. CPCs often present themselves as, these kindly mom and pop shops, but the truth is they're backed by well-financed, well-organized national anti-choice organizations, and most in the US are actually affiliated with just 4 Christian organizations who kind of run everything. They're very well funded, and they receive around $600 million a year from the government, foundations, and private donations. Many New Yorkers, even veteran pro-choice activists, don't even know that they exist, or people think they exist only in anti-choice states like Missouri, Texas, and Florida. But the truth is there are somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 all over the country, including in New York. Our Pro-Truth campaign website actually features an interactive map where you can see them, and there are about 200 that we know of in New York State, and even New York City has about 24. So the fewer people who know about them, the less attention they get, and the easier it is for them to continue to get away with these dangerous and deceptive tactics. So that's why we launched the Pro-Truth campaign in 2018, and it's a coalition of advocacy groups, providers, and lawmakers, and our 3 goals are really to educate and activate advocates. The more people who know about them, they won't continue to operate in the shadows. So hopefully you'll all go out to your networks and communities and talk about it and be on the lookout for them. Secondly, we aim to inform vulnerable communities. We partner with community-based organizations serving these targeted groups and provide resources in both English and Spanish for them to inform their communities. And our aim is for vulnerable people to be aware of these places before they find themselves facing an unwanted pregnancy, and then they'll know in advance where to find legitimate care. And third, we work to change policy and legislation. We advocate with city and state legislators to try to find effective ways to regulate these clinics. They have a right to exist, but they shouldn't be allowed to masquerade as full-service clinics, and they shouldn't be allowed to lie to people about their bodies and their choices. And in this new post-Roe era, more and more people are turning to states like New York for abortion care. And therefore, that makes us a targeted location for more CPCs. They don't need to bother in the states where abortion's illegal now. As we know, the anti-abortion movement's not satisfied with just overturning Roe. Their next move is to target access states like New York and build more and more of these fake clinics to deter people from accessing abortion where it remains legal. And I think, it's important to put it into perspective. Imagine if this were any other aspect of healthcare. Would we or the government allow for so-called health centers to exist that provide misleading, scientifically inaccurate information about cancer or heart disease or diabetes? We wouldn't. Why is this acceptable when it comes to women's reproductive health care? Lying to patients should never be an acceptable healthcare practice. And maybe this increase in CPCs plus restrictions on abortion that have led to real reproductive healthcare deserts has something to do with the shocking increase in maternal mortality in the US and why rates are the highest they've been since 1965. So to go back to Sarit's words about this week's Torah portion, she mentioned the use of the aleph, I, as an ethical imperative of the individual to act when a situation demands it. We're at a moment in New York and in this country when autonomy and dignity have been threatened, and there are concrete actions we can take right now to fight this and expand protections here. So today I have a few asks of you. First, if you're around, join us on a trip to Albany on May 8th to lobby our state legislators to pass critical state legislation this term. And there's some flyers in the lobby that have that information. 2, help us pass the New York State Equal Rights Amendment. And 3, please spread the word about the dangers of crisis pregnancy centers and their influx into New York. There are our pro-truth brochures in the lobby, also in both English and Spanish. So if you can, supply them to doctors' offices, schools, community centers, or any other organizations you work with. Let's work together to keep people, bless you, informed and able to access safe and accurate information. I'll be around during the Kiddush if anyone has any questions, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was amazing. And I'll just make a last shameless plug for joining our Reproductive Justice Action Group. If you're not already on the list, you can see me or Amy. Raise your hand. We'll also be upstairs at Kiddush. And I just want to underscore the fact that action is the best antidote to depression. And we have actions no matter what your sort of level of comfort or interest in action is. So our group is packing post-abortion kits for patients. So if what you really love is to do that kind of hands-on piece, we have that for you. There are things that you can do with the Pro-Truth campaign from the privacy of your own home and computer, if that's what you like. We have financial donation opportunities, if that's your thing, and we have the advocacy and lobbying activities, if that's your thing. So we're hoping that we provide something that resonates with each of you, and that you can take on that agency in this time. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.